Welcome to One on One with the Grim One. I am your host, the most electrifying man in corpse entertainment, the Necrosexual! And joining me in the great north of Canada, we have Lorcan from Skumstrike. How the hell are you?
Doing grand, man. How are you doing yourself?
Grim.
Grimly. Excellent.
This is One on One with the Grim One. And what that means is each week my victim picks a record that holds a special place in their black hearts. So tell me, Lorcan, what record have we selected to dive into on this musical journey?
So the record that I have selected to check out is an artifact of deep nerddom, I would say, from the mid 1980s. The record is, and I don't know if you'll see it here with my stupid Zoom background, but it is Fate's Warning, Awaken the Guardian.
The Guardian has been awakened. Just
about, man. I mean, I'm only halfway through my first cup of coffee, but I'm awakening as much as I can. And I did listen to it earlier on again. So it's a nice wake-up record, to be honest with you, given the name and everything.
Same thing, yes. I also have needed to get awakened with my cup of coffee. It went cold already, but I was, in addition to listening to it this week, in preparation for our talk, I also rocked it while getting on my face paint. Believe it or not, I don't wake up like this, although sometimes I certainly have woke up in my corpse paint. Just one of the occupational hazards of being...
That must be murder on your pillows and bedclothes, though, right?
Not as much as it is murder on my pores. My skin has gotten a little bit angry sometimes.
Oh, I can imagine.
But I've also stepped up my skincare. Eventually what's going to happen, Lorcan, is I'm just going to look so decrepit that I won't even need to put it on anymore. So it'll just kind of like tattoo itself on my face.
You're just going to fast forward about 50 years in terms of your facial aging.
You learn a lot about not just the music, but the guests and the people who I speak with in maybe ways that a normal interview wouldn't yield. And with Fate's Warning, it was a band that I've known them always to be like a musician's band. You know, the people who...
Very much so.
Yeah, I think that they're mentioned a lot in the same breath as Queensryche or Dream Theater. And maybe they're not on that same commercial level or not quite in the mainstream consciousness with the normies as those bands are. I'm not sure if Fate's Warning was ever on MTV like Queensryche. But the people who know...
It's a good question, actually, yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, and you can see the picture behind you. They're very fine young men in their heyday. They have gray hair, so certainly they have the face for television. Well, maybe not the front man, but the rest of them.
Man, this whole thing is going to revolve around the front man. Okay, so yeah. I'll hear no negativity about Mr. John Arch. Okay.
Is that the guy in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, John Arch is the main man on this record and on the previous two, but not to detract obviously from your intro, which has been spot on so far. But it's very much a case where the band are of two eras, and there's a very, very clear dividing line between their early, more like heavy metal 80s era, and then they transition into this kind of more commercial, more kind of rock-oriented 90s era that they have, which has a completely different singer. And this guy, John Arch, disappears basically after this record. To the wailing of many, many fans who absolutely adored what he brought to the band. But yeah, if you like, I mean, I can take it away if you like, and kind of get into how I got into the record and kind of the background of the band if you want, or
yeah, you're great. You're doing my job for me, but you. Heavy metal hangover, yeah. I know. I appreciate you carrying the weight as well, because I can become a chatty show ghoul if I'm not careful, especially when the wine's flowing.
But well, do you have any booze at this stage of the morning, or are you just are you still in recovery mode?
Yeah, no, I'm not that much of a full-fledged rock and roll-aholic. I save my drinking for the evening, so right now it's just coffee, although really sometimes Bloody Marys or some whiskey in that coffee can go a long way.
You can't go wrong, man.
I was just going to say, before we dive into it, John Arch looks a lot like Curtis Dewar, who is a public relations guy who's done some public relations for me, and also he has a podcast out. Yeah, and he's from Canada. He looks like he looks like Curtis Dewar of Dewar PR with hair. So that's kind of funny. I'll have to
he's channeling himself across dimensions, maybe.
But yeah, so tell me why you selected this record.
First things first, I'm not a huge Fate Warning fan. Okay, off the bat. Like yourself, they were a name that I heard an awful lot over the years. they were kind of thrown around, like you said, in the same breath as bands like Dream Theater and Queensryche and stuff like that. And but they never really achieved the same level of commercial success as a band like Dream Theater, let's say. They were part of the big three, supposedly, of progressive metal in the US, but I kind of avoided it because I kind of thought about it the same way that people kind of think about like dad rock and stuff like that. And I was like, I want to listen to Slayer, I want to listen to like thrash metal and black metal and death metal, and I don't want to listen to like some metal band that's trying to sound like Rush in like 1989 or something like that. So I kind of avoided a lot of that sort of stuff. But then I discovered this earlier period of Fate's Warning, and I loved it when I did. The year was, I think, 2008 or so when I got into them. I was living in my hometown in Dublin, Ireland, and I was in my first proper metal band with a group of friends. We're called Council of Tanis. We were a doom metal band, and we were totally indebted to like kind of old school doom metal, totally obsessed with stuff like Solitude Aeternus and Candlemass and even newer bands like Reverend Bazaar. But our singer brought this record to my attention, Anthony McGee, or Crow as we knew him, and he was like, you need to check out this record, it's absolutely amazing. And it is there's a trio of albums that the band put out when they got their shit together and started to release stuff in the early 80s. So you have Nights on Brocken in 1984, and then The Spectre Within the year afterwards, and then there was this record, Awaken the Guardian. And then it all sort of changed for Fate's Warning, and they got a new singer in, Ray Adler, and they went way more commercial and rock, and I lost interest.
They went full dad rock.
Very much so, yeah. And they were very successful, I think, in terms of being that, because people ate up those records. I think a lot of people are still really into those records. I've never really delved into it too much. I'm not saying they're shitty or anything. I'm just saying I never spent the time with them that I probably should have spent with them. But this record was introduced to me by our singer, who is a huge fan of our man, John Archer, who has perhaps, and you could hear it even on your first listen to the album if you throw it on. It's all up on YouTube. I'm sure you can check it out. But his phrasing and his delivery is, for me, the thing that really makes this record just like, wow, this is not really like anything I've ever listened to before from that era. Just the way he works in these higher octaves and delivers things, you can tell that he's a very, very technically skilled vocalist. But he's still playing and singing in a band that's like very much sort of caught between these two worlds of like early 80s heavy metal, like, yeah, let's fucking go riffs, and also like, let's be introspective and talk about it, you know.
Let's talk about our feelings.
Shit, you know.
Yes.
But this record, I think, so I would say like the standout things that brought it to my attention the first time I heard it, and it was introduced to me by Crow, the singer in our band, was the technical performance from John Arch was just stunning. Like, I'd never really heard anything before that. The riffing is fucking great. It alternates between kind of Iron Maiden-y passages and like heavier, slower, groovier stuff. But like the lyrics are just completely bonkers. Like, I don't know what he's singing about half the time, but it's just like total fantasy, total wonder and creativity and stuff going on in that regards.
Yeah, I think the first song opens up. It's about like hunting a witch.
Yeah.
and then from there it kind of goes all over the place.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, if you were to tell me like what is the actual theme of the record, is there any sort of a concept running through it? I haven't got a notion, to be honest with you.
Wow.
But it's definitely, every song throws up an interesting sort of kind of, I'd say, slice of fantasy world wonder madness going on, including that first song. I think it's The Sorceress is the first song. So it starts with this like acoustic guitar intro, and it's very dreamy and synthy, and then it's like riff time, and John is like all over the place. But halfway through it, he just goes, I don't know why he does it. Yeah, he goes, I'm the Witchfinder General. And I'm just like, I guess what this song is about is hunting witches.
Well, there's also that band. I think they were a new wave of British heavy metal band, Witchfinder General.
Witchfinder General were one of the bands that really influenced the doom metal band that I was in when I first heard this. So when I heard that, I was like, this is a sign.
Nothing like an old-fashioned heavy metal hat tip to your influences. I'm a big
Maybe
fan of those.
Kind of bedded me in, made me feel a little bit at home with the record from the beginning, you know?
You got to have those Easter eggs. Well, for me, First off, I have to also point out that
I'm very curious how you found it, to be honest with you.
yeah.
A very tough record to kind of get into.
First off, that logo, Street Fighter definitely ripped off that logo. That looks like the cold version, the blue version of the same font that's used in the Street Fighter logo. They just changed it to be red and orange. So that was one thing. I was like, holy shit, I've seen that before in Street Fighter. So there was that. And then likewise, it has the total like kind of fantasy, just kind of like Frank Frazetta's on steroids. Maybe not up to the technical skill of Frank Frazetta as an artist, but just like
no,
super...
but it's like there's an awful lot of fucking like
there's a lot going on
here.
Yeah, it was the 80s, man. People's minds were being expanded and the creative juices were flowing, and the oil paint was definitely flowing on that. So it definitely looked the part. I thought they were going to be a lot more progressive because, again, I had heard them mentioned in the same breath as Queensryche and Dream Theater. But to me, this sounded like a straight up power metal record.
I don't know if you've been listening long enough, but have you ever tried to actually sing along with this record or any aspect of this?
Oh, Lord. I mean, I could try. It just wouldn't sound pretty.
It's a fucking, you're on a hiding to nowhere. It's absolutely impossible to sing along to anything in this record, I find.
Yeah. Maybe hum along to it or like,
Yeah, I hope you have a high-pitched humming capacity because like I was trying to sing along to some of it earlier or even like just hum or just like, I just felt like I was going to burst my vocal cords even trying to get to like the chorus of Valley of the Dolls. It's he's all over the map, I think, in terms of what he can deliver.
Yeah, it sort of struck me like Rush, a little bit of Geddy Lee.
Oh yeah.
The vocals, as power metal tends to be, they can be often divisive, or love them or hate them. For me, they sounded like a little bit like Geddy Lee, a little bit annoying, but again, it was a great range and it totally works for the music. And like anything else, it might take a minute or so to get used to, and then it just becomes part of the sonic atmosphere.
I'm just taking a moment to process that you found Geddy Lee a little annoying at times. You know,
his vocals are a little
the Canadian in me is just like fighting at the moment, but I'm letting it slide.
In Rush, they're great musicians too, so
I think so. Yeah, it's I definitely can hear the Rush influence. Rush are like one of my favorite bands ever.
Yeah.
I know I'm like saying, oh, I love Rush, but I don't like a lot of progressive metal. But that's pretty much just kind of how things have gone in my kind of like listening career. But yeah, definitely I can see the influence of Rush in terms of they're ambitious on this record.
It's epic music. They don't really make music like that anymore, or there are some bands, but I think that in the 80s it was a lot more.
I think
a lot more out there. Yeah.
It's a funny one because you say power metal and there's always this division that's there between the European power metal stuff, like Hammerfall and stuff like that. It's a lot more saccharine. It's a lot more melodic, to be honest with you. And then you have the 80s brand, the US power metal, which would include obviously Fate's Warning to an extent, but also I think a really great companion piece to put this next to would be the first couple of Queensryche records. The first Queensryche EP is pure fucking flaming metal. It's amazing. Just riffs and it's 80s to the bone. But then they put out, Warning. And I think you'll get a lot. I think if you do, definitely listen to a record like this and then Warning by Queensryche, because you'll see these bands like that, he said, who are they're going places. They're trying to be ambitious in terms of what they're doing. And they're really pushing their compositional skills. But they still have this grounding in 80s metal, which it's fucking great. I just love when bands like haven't like outgrown that yet, know, and they're like, oh, because like there was these later records that Fate's Warning put out that were far more commercially successful, like Parallels and Inside Out and stuff like that, and they're a lot more easy to take. But like for me, like I was talking to Anthony McGee Crow, the singer of my old band. I was like, what? I'm going to be talking to the Necrosexual about this record. I need your input. What do you think? And he was like, for me, this record is just steeped in wonder. Like he genuinely sounds like he is living these experiences in the lyric departments, especially. But after that, they got lost in like real life stuff and like and there's just a touch of magic here, I think, which anybody can kind of pick up after one or two listens, It's deep level dorkdom, man, but there's definitely people out there who there's a division definitely between Fate's Warning fans who are wholly sold on the Ray Adler period. So essentially after this record, acrimoniously, John got kicked out of the band / left. There's always been debate over which one he did. So like, it's such a like a metal band thing. Apparently he was like, they wanted me to quit my job, but I had to support myself. And they were like, we never asked you to quit your job. We just wanted you to commit more to the band. Well, where does one begin and where does one end? It's like a typical, kind of a band drama. But anyway, he was gone and they started this more commercially successfully. Certain fans at a later period, I think, detest this kind of vocal all over the place thing as an example of like 80s excess, the sort of music that, they were glad the band sort of stepped away from. And then there's people like me who are like, honestly, this is probably the best record that they did from what I've heard. And I haven't substantially listened to all the later stuff, but like this is magic for me. I really like it. But yeah, if you go onto Metal Archives, I know it's a very simple way to try and take like an acid test of what's going on, but it's one of those records where it's like 99%, 0%, 99%, 0%. Like people are fighting over how it should be classed and how it should be seen. But I think the real kind of evidence, I think, for it being a record that deserves to be seriously respected is how the band has ultimately very much kind of done a turnaround and said, oh, we need to respect this record because it's fucking great and people love it. So they re-recorded it, or they actually got John Arch back, mended a few bridges, and got him to sing at a couple of shows, big festival shows with him, and they performed the album in its entirety. I think they did it in Prague Power in the US, which is a big festival, obviously Prague focused, but also at Up the Hammers, like probably the biggest, sorry, not Up the Hammers, the German one, which I've totally forgotten the name of. Anyway, like a German traditional heavy metal fest. They got back, they played the entire record a couple of years ago, and they made a live record out of it, which I think is an example of the band sort of saying, look, this record does deserve to be respected. And, ultimately, I think that the band were able to, I'm not in any way an expert on the band, but I know that the guitarist, John Mateus, was able to hook up then with John Arch again. And they created this new project called, very unimaginatively, Arch Mateus, and they put out a couple of records. And they're great. They're really, really good from what I've heard. So I think the band themselves kind of returning to this and kind of saying, okay, we're going to recognize this. We're going to do live records of this. We're going to put on shows for this. And it's a fact that they've been able to get back together and actually create new music in a different project. I think the argument's been won that it has, been a very, very important part of the band's history, and that it just rocks.
When I listen to power metal, I want to be like inspired and motivated to go out there and like raid a castle and party. And this album definitely had all of that spirited, kind of like triumphant, sing-along, anthemic, or like I said, hum-along, but these really catchy vocal melodies and guitar melodies. But then it also had a progressive edge where they just totally like threw out the riffs. So it was an interesting plan of attack, and it's something that I hadn't really heard with a lot of power metal bands that kind of had the best of both worlds.
How did you find the production?
I thought it was fine.
Does it sound like a record from 1986? It sounds like a record from 1982.
The album cover, the painting definitely looks like it's from 1982. 86 was one of the best years of metal across the board.
86 was an epic year. Like, I mean, think about the records that came out there. But I have heard the criticism that the record's a bit weak sounding, considering this is the year that like Rain and Blood came out, right? Yeah. But like, this still sounds like it's a little bit anemic, and it's so funny because I was looking through the notes here. This is a 2012 reissue put out by Metal Blade, and these were like definitely one of the big flagship bands in the 80s for Metal Blade when they were kind of forging their way. But it was produced, it looks like, by the band Fates Warning and Brian Slagle of Metal Blade.
Right. Yeah.
And the first line of the special thanks is, "If you want anything done right, do it yourself, Brian Slagle." And I was just like, okay, well, that's cool. I mean, obviously they have a really good relationship and everything like that, but it could probably do with about a 30% pump in terms of like fucking impact. Like, it's a little bit like a little thin. That's how I would describe it. Not terribly so, but like if it had a little bit more impact, I think you'd have a lot more people on board with it as like, oh, fucking classic 80s record. Unfortunately,
with that time period, even into the early 90s, with a lot of great death metal bands, and thrash metal bands too, Destruction, Sodom, some Creator albums, just across the board, they're epic masterpieces, but they do sound a little bit thin. And unfortunately,
I'm not a fan of people going back saying you have to re-record stuff. I think artifacts should kind of left as they are.
yeah.
But I can understand somebody definitely criticizing and calling it a little bit thin. Yeah.
I guess the only workaround is just to turn it up, just crank that volume, because it's heavy music. So that's the way it's meant to be heard.
Yeah, I mean that's the best way. The best way to experience this is at maximum volume, 100%.
You mentioned it was 2008, the first time you heard this record.
Yeah.
Paint a picture of like your first impressions when you listened.
Sure. Okay. Imagine the most fucking shitty lane, like back alley rehearsal space that you've ever come across. This is Dublin, right as the recession hit the country. We got hit really bad in 2008, and half the country was out of work. But I was still in a band, and I was just finishing college. And a couple of friends and I rented a space down this terrible fucking laneway where people would like burn out cars, and there'd be like we'd come out and hookers would be there with their clients and stuff like that.
Sounds pretty metal.
It's like you never knew what was going to be waiting when you walked out of that fucking place. But anyway, it was that band practice, yeah, for sure. And my good friend Crow was singing for us in the band, and he just basically, I think he might have stuck it on, or it might have been at like when we were having beers at someone's house afterwards or something like that. But we would be like writing these songs, trying to sound like Sabbath, or trying to sound like Candlemass or someone like that. And he very much kind of just presented it to me. And he was, I think, really exploring a lot of progressive metal at the time. I wasn't so much, but yeah, he was just like, you have to check this out. And he was very much bouncing off Fogg, our bassist at the time. And they were kind of like just kind of geeking out over how cool John Arch's vocals were on this one. So it led me to finally check it out. I think he might have given me a burn of it or something. Or maybe I sourced a copy from somewhere. But yeah, it basically, it just became this thing that I went back to again and again whenever I had to take this long ass bus journey in and out of Dublin City, in order to get to practice. And, yeah, it was just one of those records at this time when, there was 4 or 5 of us in the band, and we were just constantly sharing records, constantly sharing albums, and playing our first shows. Like that was a cool little band we were in, very much kind of learning on the job. We got some like ridiculous support slots with that band. We supported like Pentagram and Grand Magus and stuff like that. We had no right to be supporting those bands. We were fucking crap in comparison to the bands we were supporting. But it was a great time for me, in that it was a really depressive, shitty period in Irish history, because everybody was out of work and everybody was emigrating. Like that's what happens in Ireland when the economy goes south. Unfortunately, it might be happening again this year because of what we're dealing with COVID. But a lot of people were leaving, but we had this like fun little core of friends that were together, and we were able to find a little slice of magic just by sharing this record between us, which was nice. And goes to show that even though it came out in 1986, it was doing some good for me personally, anyway, in 2008.
Yeah, definitely ahead of its time, I think, in terms of this the riffs and song structures being pretty wacky.
I can't say it was much of an influence, like especially with Skumstrike. Like I'm in 2 bands here. Skumstrike, play guitar, but I'm also play guitar in a black death metal band called Profane Order. I can't say it's had much influence on me musically, because have never fucking even tried to go near what Matthias is doing in this record. But it's just been a great thing to admire.
You don't hear many bands that sing like that anymore. I mean, there's a lot of those dudes who were self-taught. I don't know if he was technically trained or not. It certainly sounds like it.
I'm not sure if he was or not, but yeah.
One other band, I'm diverging a little bit, but hey, it's my podcast. I'll make the rules and I'll break them too. Have you ever heard the band Blessed Death?
No, I can't say I have.
Oh man, so you're in for a treat. This is a band, thrash metal band from Old Bridge, New Jersey. Their landmark album was called Killer Be Killed. I want to say it came out 84, and it was like classic thrash metal, speed metal. But again, these guys were all over the place with their tempos, with their riffs. They had a super progressive, non-traditional edge. Riff City, and then the vocals. This dude hit those fucking high notes like nothing I've heard before. It really like was all over the place. And
Blessed Death, yeah?
Yeah, Blessed Death, Killer Be Killed. This dude like just wails. It's nuts.
There's a definite sort of collection of little bands, I'd say, from the mid to late 80s, and even into the early 90s that can do some really kind of crazy shit like that. I would say even if you're not a fan of like 80s metal or progressive metal in any respect, if you're a fan of bands like Coroner or even Confessor, like bands that like you're kind of like, whoa, the vocals here are kind of at odds a little bit with the music that I'm hearing. then this record actually might be something that appeals to you because the performance is so strange and so kind of inventive in relation to what they're putting out. But yeah, man, I'm always interested in hearing bands with interesting vocalists for sure from that era. So they're on the shopping list.
You also play in a band, like you mentioned, Skumstrike, and I can't help but think that some of that scum was planted in your brain in your old practice space with hookers and burning cars. It sounds pretty scummy.
It was.
And I was looking forward to seeing you guys invade the States. You had a little concert planned in Philadelphia in June, and unfortunately, due to the state of the world being a trash fire, that has been postponed. But I was definitely looking forward to seeing you guys fucking shred it, because you have a new EP out called Execution Void. I got to listen to that and review it on Metal Injection, and it is a certified shredder, so definitely listen to that at home if you want to hear some riffs.
I'm gonna be completely out there and say, like, essentially what happened was myself and the drummer and the singer got into the room the night that Donald Trump was elected in 2016. An inspiring occasion for like negative fast music.
It was a tragedy even in Canada.
I was getting the bus home afterwards going, fuck, man. What have I got myself into here? You know, starting a band.
Build a wall.
Vicious of occasions, you know. Essentially, Skumstrike was it is an exercise between myself and Zach to just shoehorn together nasty punk and fast speed metal. That was the plan. So I'd say on Execution Void, we recorded it almost, I'd say about 8 or 9 months ago now at this stage, but the influences on, I'd say, would be pretty evenly matched between very fast, like 80s inspired metal. I would say stuff like, you know, like Old Slayer. We love like Canadian metal too, like Razor and Exciter. But also we're a big fan of like just a kind of speed metal influence on more contemporary black metal. So like we love Dark Throne. We love Craft is a band that like I absolutely adore from like a riffing point of view. And the idea was to just kind of sledgehammer that into basically this whole punk ecosystem that exists in Montreal. Montreal is a fucking great town if you're into punk and you're into hardcore. And it's okay, it's pretty good too for metal, but like you could go to a show every weekend before pre-COVID disaster, but you could go to a show and catch killer hardcore bands from all over the East Coast and stuff that would drop in here. So myself and Zach, we're both immigrants, and we've been living here for a few years. We're going to those sort of shows together because we love punk and hardcore. Found out that we both really loved metal from the 80s and like fast shit, and we just squished it together basically. And what's come out has been fun. People have been really supportive of us. It's a shame we couldn't get down to the States, but we have every intention of coming back next year, if at all possible. But we're just gonna, like everybody else, I guess, have to see. We can't even practice because Quebec at the moment has got very, very strict rules in place. We can't have more than 3 people gather in any public area. So we're a 3-piece. Kind of fucking sucks. If we were 2, we'd probably get away with it. But yeah, so we're at the moment we're just writing. We're sending each other riffs. We're talking about stuff. We're trying to stay positive. And like a lot of bands, we're just building up a little bank of shit. But yeah, man, we've every intention of coming back down, hopefully, and hitting the States, Philadelphia, the East Coast next year. And I'm very, very excited about doing it. One
of the reasons I was excited to see you guys in Philadelphia, especially, was because Philadelphia is a great musical city. In the last 10 years, it's been a ton of metal bands that have came here or popped up locally. But it also has a punk rock heritage. Not so much the oi stuff, just like really fast music. Dudes that love to drink 40s and fucking mosh. And every now and again you have bands that can kind of have that punk influence, and they bring the punks out. And it also has the Metallica, the metal edge to it that, you know, unites those two scenes. Because with punks, they've always kind of existed in their own community, and they usually there are a lot of metalheads that are punks, but there's not a lot of punks that are metalheads.
It's funny that.
I think Skumstrike was one of those bands that could, you know, hopefully bridge and have all the fucking punks come out from under the sewers and make for some sick mosh pits. So I was definitely looking forward.
Man, if we can make it down there, I there's gonna be so much pent up frustration and fucking aggression, I think, after this thing, that like we're gonna literally plug in and then it's just gonna be like straight into the fucking crowd. Like, let's just fucking absolutely raise as much mayhem as we can. Yes. So yeah, no, it sounds like a scene and a like a collection of people that would be fucking really cool to play with once this shit is over and done with.
Thank you, Lorcan, for going 1, on one with the Grim One. I definitely enjoy talking to you and listening to this album.
It's my pleasure, man. And let's see if I can get this fucking thing to work again. I know there's a lot of people out there who might be like, oh, fuck Fate's Warning. I've heard a lot of shit about this band. Give it a roll. See what you think. And look, man, I hope this whole period is going okay for you too. It can be tough being the top man in Corpse Entertainment when entertainment is outlawed. So fair play to you for continuing, this through the medium of Zoom.
Absolutely, baby. Always the outlaw. The top of the game in Corpse Entertainment. I am the Necrosexual. Thank you, Lorcan. Check out Skumstrike, Execution Void, and I will see you perverts in hell.